Bill Browder is Vladimir Putin's #1 foreign enemy and CEO of the Hermitage Capital Management. Welcome to our program, Mr. Browder.
Great to be here.
I would like to begin with the recent developments. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance said that the U.S. could impose military actions against Russia if Vladimir Putin doesn't settle the war. What is your take on such developments and the statements from the Trump's administration, threats to Vladimir Putin?
Well, there is I would call it a mixed bag. On one hand, there have been some helpful, tough statements from the Trump administration. As you mentioned, J.D. Vance's discussion of troops on the ground or more sanctions. We also have President Trump issuing a Truth Social posting where he talked about taxes, tariffs, and sanctions if Putin didn't negotiate. That's one side. Then on the other side, we have President Trump having a 1.5-hour telephone conversation with Putin to discuss the supposed peace settlement. And then he just then called President Zelensky to inform him of what was said. That's not a negotiation. It's also not particularly helpful that Trump has talked about inviting Russia back into the G7, which was a statement he made yesterday. And it's also not helpful that he wants to go and meet Putin in Saudi Arabia to negotiate a peace deal in the absence of Ukraine. And so we're dealing with a lot of different conflicting pieces of information. It's very hard to know who we should believe, who we shouldn't believe. What's being said is policy or what they're just making up on the spot. But if I was a Ukrainian right now, I would be pretty upset. And as a sympathizer to Ukraine, I'm not very happy with the state of events.
From your perspective, what does President Trump is trying to do? Do you see this as a special technique for negotiations with Vladimir Putin?
Well, I don't see any special logic in the technique. So, for example, through his defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, he started giving away territory of Ukraine. He made a commitment not to allow Ukraine into NATO. That's not a negotiating technique. If you're negotiating, you don't give away your position before the negotiation starts. And so I don't know what to make of it other than it's not helpful. I think it's puts Ukraine in a weaker position than it was before, and it's hard to know what's going to happen.
It's also interesting that today we have heard another statement from the Pete Hegseth, U.S. Secretary of Defense. He said that the U.S. could return nuclear weapons to Ukraine if Donald Trump decides to do so. Do you see this as an attempt from Trump's team to raise stakes and also to improve their own position after the recent yesterday's statement about Putin and NATO Ukraine?
It's hard for me to imagine this as a strategy. I imagine this is a reaction to the extremely negative reaction of all of America's allies to these confusing statements that were made over the last couple of days. I think that it's very difficult to read anything into what's happening because it just changes so radically from day to day. But when the future existence of your country is at stake, that must be very upsetting.
Also, I'd like to cover the readiness of Russian dictator Putin to negotiate with Trump. Recently, you said that Vladimir Putin is a psychopath and it's impossible to negotiate with him. From your perspective, is it possible to force psychopaths Vladimir Putin to agree to a ceasefire?
Well, what I know that Putin likes to do is to make agreements that he then doesn't honor. He's been around for 25 years now. There's no mystery to Vladimir Putin. What does he do? He agrees to things, he lies in negotiations, and then he doesn't honor his commitments. And so I don't think that any promise from him serves any purpose whatsoever. It's very much a empty promise. He lies and he deceives and he goes against his commitments. And so there's no reason to believe he would be any different in the future than he was in the past.
But do you feel that Vladimir Putin can agree with this recent proposal on a ceasefire, for example, for at least some time to have a ceasefire in Ukraine?
Well, I think that he would agree to a ceasefire if the conditions put him in a position to subsequently break the ceasefire and carry on with his war. I mean, Putin is tired. Ukrainians are exhausted. Putin is tired. He's expended huge amounts of resources, people, money, equipment, and I think he probably wouldn't mind a short break to build up his resources again.
So you're confident that if there is a ceasefire, Vladimir Putin could agree with this deal just to regroup and attack Ukraine again in the future?
I think he's only going to agree to some deal if he gets a really good deal. And I think that he's also very much a man who likes to create a confusing process where it's hard to respond to what he's saying. And so it looks like there's a negotiation going on, but there isn't really a negotiation.
So you don't expect Vladimir Putin to make any kind of concessions to Ukraine and the United States?
No, absolutely not.
He will not do this because that's how he behaves.
Putin is a guy who doesn't negotiate. He doesn't compromise. He only pushes hard. And he doesn't mind exposing his own people to pain because he's not a democratically elected leader. He's a dictator. And so it doesn't matter to him. His credibility doesn't matter to him. Nothing really matters to him other than basically being the strong man and being seen to be strong.
Also, according to Bloomberg, Vladimir Putin is forming his special team for negotiations with the American administration. From your perspective, do you feel that this team could play any kind of a role in the decision-making process in Kremlin, or only Vladimir Putin is the guy who makes all the decisions?
No, he doesn't delegate to anybody. He's a decision maker in all the decisions. So whoever he's sending out will, basically just figure out what's on the table and then report back to him, and then he can play around and see if there's any area where he can negotiate.
Trump is it seems like he's really confident that sanctions, tariffs, and decrease of global oil prices could really force Putin to negotiate a ceasefire. How harmful could be for Russia's economy such decisions if such decisions would be implemented by U.S. president?
Well, if the sanctions, tariffs, taxes, etc., were to seriously dent the oil revenue, then it could have an impact.
And do you feel that Trump has ability to make a decrease in oil prices worldwide or on the globe?
No, not in the short term. In the medium term, policy can change oil prices. In the short term, I don't think that's the case. But he can also be effective in cutting off Russia's ability to export their oil, either through through sanctions on shipping companies and sanctions on ports and other types of things like that.
But it would take time to decrease global oil prices.
I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
And how many time it could take from your years, months, or if there is a decision?
Years. I mean, it's a very long process to increase. Now, the oil price could change on its own very drastically if there's a recession or China has a economic problem of some significance. These are the types of things that could push the oil price in the short term. But otherwise, you need to invest in an oil well, and then that oil well needs to start pumping, and then you need to start exporting that oil, and that has to add on to all the other oil, and then the price of the oil goes down.
Also, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also says that Vladimir Putin is only pretending that he would like to have a deal, but he just tell Trump what he would like to hear. Do you agree with President Zelensky with this assessment?
Well, I think that it's slightly different than that. I think that Putin needs to have the war in place in order to stay in power. He needs to look like the strong man. And he's very upset with the losses that he's experienced and the humiliating way in which his soldiers have conducted themselves on the battlefield. But at the same time, he's not the one experiencing the pain. It's his people, and he's not in a democratic country where you can get, it's not like there's a voter electorate that will kick you out. He's very much in a position where he can experience really extreme pain for a long time without any problem.
So he just continues his war because he does not suffer himself.
Correct. And any other head of state couldn't have even achieved, or I should say, experienced 1/100th of the losses that he's experienced. In a normal situation, the people would get upset in the country, and that would be the end of that. But in Putin, there's no people to get upset.
But how Western allies and Ukraine together can inflict pain directly on Vladimir Putin? You mean like physically or other means?
Well, I think the main thing to do is to continue to wear the Russian military out, to destroy the oil refineries, as they've been doing, to get more sanctions in place, to go after the oil, to sanction the oil companies, sanction the buyers of the Russian oil, that type of thing.
What is your take on security guarantees for Ukraine? Lots of discussions about the European peacekeeping forces could be deployed to the front lines. Can you imagine such scenario?
It's completely unimaginable. I mean, I can imagine them putting peacekeepers in place, but what do the peacekeepers do when Russia starts attacking? Do they fight back? Do they want? So if you have a bunch of international peacekeepers, are they going to fight back and engage in a war with Russia, or do they just don't do anything?
And also Pete Hegseth ruled out deploying American troops on the ground. Do you feel that without American military presence, this mission could not be credible?
Well, I mean, look, the Ukrainian military has deflected a major invasion from Russia, and Ukraine wasn't known, 3 years ago to be some kind of world power. I mean, I think that anybody with enough resources can fight off Russia, and I think that if Europe was involved, I think that Russia would have a hard time with or without America.
Let's cover also the state of Vladimir Putin's grip on power. How can you assess the current situation in the Kremlin? Reuters reported that Russian allies are not really happy about the war because of sanctions, but how can you assess the state of Putin's grip on power?
He's got a firm grip on power. I mean, people are angry, people are badly affected. It's not a good situation, but it doesn't matter what people feel like in Russia because Putin will arrest, torture, and kill anybody who stands in his way. And so it's not public opinion doesn't matter. And he's very conscious of any attempted coups or anything like that because he's looking out for, disloyalty.
And from your perspective, is there a chance for another coup attempt like it was with Prigozhin march on Moscow?
It's entirely possible because Russia is a very, sort of undeveloped place politically. And so, at the right circumstances, you could easily have that.
And do you also expect such coup, for example, to pop up during the war against Ukraine if Putin continues to wage war?
Well, if Putin continues to wage war and more people die, and then Putin has to do a general conscription, if he goes out to the whole population and drags people into this war, I think he might find it very difficult, and people may say, enough is enough, we're not interested anymore.
On the other hand, there are discussions that it would be beneficial for Putin to agree with ceasefire proposal because it could be like a big comeback on the international stage, and also he could use this opportunity to even strengthen his grip on power. For example, John Bolton, former Trump's national security advisor, says that he is confident Putin will agree with Trump's proposal because it's the best way out for Vladimir Putin. Do you agree with him?
I think that Putin needs to be seen to be strong. My own experience with him is that he never compromises on anything. And so the only reason he might do a short-term deal is because he can then somehow medium-term create a situation which is much better than where he is today.
And also you said that he doesn't compromise. What could happen when he does not compromise with Donald Trump, with US president?
Well, I mean, he'll make it look like he's compromising, and Donald Trump will accept a fake compromise, but it's not going to be a real compromise.
But you don't expect any kind of confrontation between Trump and Vladimir Putin?
No, I'd be willing to bet on it.
You're confident that there will be no,
Yeah.
despite the recent threats to Vladimir Putin, sanctions, tariffs?
I don't think so.
So if there is a no deal, the war could be waged, could be moved forward and could continue.
I think the war will continue, and then Trump can express his disappointment, but he can blame it on Zelensky. I mean, there's a million ways he can spin it so that he can carry on being at war.
And what are your expectations for the year of 2025 in case of in the matter of war, negotiations, Russian economy, and Putin's power?
Well, I think the most likely scenario is that the war will continue. It's hard for me to imagine a situation where the Ukraine will be happy, Russia will be happy, and the Europeans will be happy. I think there's very, very little common ground in that area. And if that's the case, the war carries on. That's just as simple as that.
And do you feel that Europeans could be involved in this process of negotiations?
I think Europeans will be involved in the negotiations, but I don't think that that's going to end the war.
Just to be on the table, they would like to do so.
Well, I think they're going to state their position, which they're going to lay out some very strong requirements. Putin's not going to be happy with that, and no deal will get done.
Do you feel that in case of failure of negotiations, Trump can change his mind or his opinion about Vladimir Putin?
Well, I mean, that's a possibility, but we've seen his attitude, and it doesn't seem to be highly negative. And so, Trump could easily do that, but there's also a big cost to that.
And also, my final topic for you would be about also the next steps in case of financial sanctions and Russia's frozen assets. Do you expect any kind of a new approach among Trump's team on Russia's frozen assets, or you just expect EU to continue to use only revenues from this money?
Well, no, I think this is the biggest point of the whole Munich Security Conference, which is if Trump wants to cut off funding from the U.S., then we need that money for Ukraine, the frozen money, the frozen $300 billion. It's simple that if America's not ready to pay for it, Putin should pay for it, and we have that money in Europe.
And this could be the best option for Trump's administration to provide Ukraine with military hardware by using Russia's frozen assets for this.
Yeah, exactly.
But what can you say to the European allies which are really concerned about using Russia's frozen assets in the banks? They're really concerned about the euro.
I would say that you should be more concerned about the 20 million refugees that are going to come from Ukraine to Europe if Trump wins. I mean, if Trump gives to Putin a win.
Thank you, Mr. Browder, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you. Glory to Ukraine.